also being after the turn of the year, because beginner's mind is an important aspect of what we do to understand and to practice on a regular basis. And as I said in the email, typically we practice whether we're conscious of it or not, and most of the times it's subtle or subconscious that we're going for some sort of attainment. We want enlightenment, we want peace of mind, we want to feel better, we want to overcome certain habits, we have some objective in mind. And what that does is it limits our ability to just simply explore and leave ourselves open to the experience, whatever that is. It's long known in the contemplative traditions that you can't really talk about meditation. I mean, you can talk about it, but none of it really comes close, and none of it is the experience that happens during meditation, which is the point of meditation. It's just something you have to do. And the only way to do it is what we call beginner's mind, because in beginner's mind, it's characterized by a sense of curiosity, a desire to explore, and also the willingness to set aside one's preconceived notions and to be open to experience, and humility. And humility is a really important factor, because I realize when we talk about habitual patterns happening and our willfulness and how do we sorry, I was looking for something. And so when we're meditating, I've noticed this in myself, that a lot of times I'm unconscious, I'm not aware of it, but I really want to work through or deal with or resolve whatever obstacles or impediments are there, whether it's a sense of resentment or some trauma from the past or whatever it may be. And I realize that's not the point. I mean, it'll do that. Meditation will help us do that, but that's not the point. And so if we take a step back and say, okay, what's the point of meditation and spiritual practice? Well, nobody can really answer that. You can say enlightenment or a sense of equanimity or awakening, all these sort of things. You can't really, there's nothing really in our vocabulary that allows us to really pinpoint what that is. But it happens. And when we're practicing and we have good teachers. So the prerequisite is to be able to be on the lookout for and be aware of whatever preconceived notions we have, whatever intentions or goals we have set. I've heard a lot of people say, I'm going to sit 20 minutes twice a day or for a week or what. I said, look, just slow down, because usually that doesn't work out. Now, if it does work out for you, that's fine. But I'd even recommend, even if you want to and can sit for 20 minutes at a sit, that to start out with just 5 minutes and build the rhythm, as we talked about before. When you're meditating the same time every day, twice a day, 3 minutes twice a day, there's this rhythm that builds up. And our human bodies and minds go on rhythms. And so when we establish this rhythm of meditation, then we're not only better able to synchronize with the meditation experience when we're meditating, but also the rest of our life becomes synchronized with the process of meditation. Ever so subtly at first, just 3 minutes twice a day. And then when we increase that, the rest of our life begins to I guess the best word is harmonize with the meditative experience. I don't know if anyone's seen this, and if not, I'll include this next week. Is that there's some wonderful experiments done where they take sand and put it on a plate, a metal plate, and then they play sounds underneath the metal plate. And the sounds go up through the metal plate, and it vibrates per the vibration of the sound, and geometric patterns form in the sand. You change the tone of the pitch, and the patterns will change. And so that's why regular practice is so helpful, because when we do that, it's like all the rest of our mind that's really kind of wandering around in cartoons or history or trauma or whatever. When we start meditating, everything begins to harmonize to the meditative state. Now, I'm talking years and decades of practice, okay? So this is not something that happens overnight, but it starts right away. And we'll start, and things will begin to shift. When I've done taught some of the 8-week courses, I've found that toward the end, after week 5, the 8-week course, and after like 5 or so, people start noticing things differently, seeing things differently in their life, sort of spontaneously. Like when they're, walking around, they really enjoyed the park and the sounds. They could hear the birds sing. There's a shift in their ability to connect with their surroundings, natural surroundings, and they become more patient, and they notice that they're more likely to pause when something happens, and all stuff begins to happen because our mind is all jumpy, and which means it's not coherent. It's like having an orchestra and everybody sort of playing their own piece that they want to play. And so when we meditate, everything begins to take shape around the natural mind, the natural rhythms of the natural mind. And when that happens, things change. We feel different. We start reacting to people differently and reacting to ourselves differently. And again, I like the caveat, the fine print at the bottom. It takes a while. Progress is immediate, but it takes a while to really have these things set into one's life. And it's the more we meditate, and the more we do spiritual practice and whatever else can serve the meditative state, then we move along, and things continue to happen. So the idea of beginner's mind is to know that it's almost impossible to not have some kind of preconceived notion when we're meditating or doing our spiritual practice, whatever it is. It's almost impossible because we're human beings. We have a conceptual framework that governs all of our relationships with ourselves and others and the world and such. And we can't just sort of erase that. So we have some conscious and unconscious motivations for doing what we do. And it's important to know that that's just part of the process, to recognize our limitations and recognize our expectations and what we're wanting to get out of, so to speak, get out of the meditation practice or the compassion practices. So being aware of that, we're more likely to be able to recognize them and bypass them or let them go and be more open to the experience, whatever that is. So I was reading, I put in the email the 3 different aspects of considered to be, generally speaking, aspects of the natural mind and the being open to immediate experience and experiencing beginner's mind is humility. In other words, being curious and wanting to investigate and such are our ego has to be a servant, so to speak, not the master. What would Darwin have done if he was going to, all he wanted to do was find different species and consider himself to be considered to be a world's best biologist? He had no interest in that. He was curious about, what is this about? Where do these come from? What are all these species about? How do they develop? How do we, as a human race, develop? What are the factors that are involved? What governs our behavior? Those kinds of questions. He was an investigator. He wasn't out to find any particular thing for fame or fortune or anything like that. So he really had beginner's mind. He went to Easter Island and said, what's going on here? It's like open. And I don't know if you know, but Jane Goodall was not a scientist. She was the assistant to a professor of, I forget what field, but it had to do with like animal behavior or something like that. And the professor wanted to study chimpanzees. And he sent her, even though she had no scientific background. And she asked him, why did you do that? I said, well, all these scientists go down, they're going to try to find what they're looking for, and that's not what we're after. We're after to just discover what's going on with these chimpanzees. And so they sent her down there, and somehow intuitively he knows she was a kind and empathetic and curious person, and sent her down there, and look what happened. And interestingly, there's some wonderful documentaries on her. But she was down there for a very specific period of time, like 3 months or something. And she would hang out around the chimpanzees and just make herself available and leave food. And they completely ignored her. Right? So like about 3 days before she had to go back, they kind of invited her into their circle. And then when she did, that's where her research began, and she got her stay down there extended and such. And she's just investigating. She said, well, how do these guys participate? What kind of language do they use? How do they reproduce? How do they relate to each other? How do they develop community, And the professor knew that many of the scientists of the day were all puffed up and not really all that humble. So he chose her because she's a humble, kind-hearted person, which I think is just brilliant. So in considering what the natural mind or beginner's mind is about, is that whatever we know, we sort of have to leave at the door. Now, that's not I don't know how that's entirely possible or possible 100%, but it's important to be aware of that and to do our best to do that, and to ask ourselves the question, why am I doing this? Do I have a particular idea of what the outcome should be? Do I want to achieve a nirvanic-like state, and do I want to, am I doing this so my depression will go away? Whatever the questions are, and to be able to set that aside, just simply set it aside if possible. First, we have to be aware of it, and once we're aware of those ideas, then make a decision to set them aside. And just do the exercise. That's when, often I will say, practice, practice, practice. And what that really means is just do the exercise. Just do the practice as the meditation practice and the compassion practices as described, and don't worry about it. We'll see what happens. So it's a little more complicated with compassion, because compassion exercises really engage deeper parts of ourselves and sometimes when we do the compassion exercises, they go in a direction we hadn't intended. So it's really important to just follow that, rather than say, no, I've got to stick to the plan here. What the exercise says is do this, and the mind wants to go some other direction. We go in the direction that the mind wants to go. And that's where we really get to explore and apply compassion to areas that we maybe didn't even know we needed compassion in those areas. So in that too, open mind, this open heart and open mind is the name of a wonderful book by Father Thomas Keating, and I think it sums it up. Actually, it's open mind, open heart. He talks about centering prayer and meditation in the contemplative Christian tradition. It's a wonderful book on meditation, and so that's what that's kind of what it's about. Open mind, open heart. When our mind is open and our heart is open, that's the best state in which to meditate or do on spiritual practices. So humility, I was thinking about, and there's so much can be said about it, and I'll probably do this next time too, or really soon, because humility, because it's we can describe it as the absence of arrogance. Okay, and what is arrogance? Arrogance is a steadfast investment in oneself as an individual. It's like the perception of oneself that I'm separate from and free from any kind of restrictions, and I have free will and I can do whatever I want to, regardless of the consequences. And so that we get a good idea, we think, oh, well, this, I want a new car, or whatever it is. And so, why do you want a new car? Well, this is kind of old, I'm tired of it. But not thinking, how many cars are on the road. They really don't need, do you really need a car? Is it worth the expense to get a new car? You're going to buy a new car that loses 64% of its value in the first 2 years, regardless. And why are you buying this car? Like in Dallas, we're besieged with pickup trucks and these enormous vehicles. There's a new generation of vehicles from GMC and other manufacturers. Are huge. The tires almost come up to my window on my little dinky Prius, So, but they're really difficult. They're causing a lot of accidents because they can't see the pedestrians. So a lot more pedestrian accidents. And also the lights are so bright, there's some regulations had to be passed that they get retrofitted to be not so bright, because they come along, you can't see. And particularly coming at you, it's really hard to see the road, particularly at night, because they're so bright. They don't think about that. They don't say, well, if I have these lights really bright, what would the consequences be? They don't ask those questions. So I can do whatever I want to. I'm going to make them really bright, and that's cool, and everybody will like that, and blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't work that way. So, humility, I started to think about humility as being accepting our place in the fabric of life. Our connection with other people, our connection with nature, and acknowledging and what would be the word? Being involved in or being aware of this connection with life in general. We talk about. I was just thinking this morning that oftentimes, particularly in this meeting and at other times, we talk about how the weather is, and that's generally considered to be punting. You don't really know what to say. You don't really have anything to say. You don't know the person very. You just talk about the weather. But it's really, these days, it's a real conversation because of global warming. And so things have changed in this regard. And the people who are concerned about global warming are concerned about the weather patterns are much more connected to nature. And if you take a look at it, sort of human behavior and behavior of nature, there's really similar patterns. You know, we have air, fire, water, and earth, the elements, and the earth has been very out of balance. We've created a lot of imbalance in nature, and in the absence of humility. And so, you know, and I've mentioned this several times, but some of you may not know that the Dust Bowl was a huge problem, and that literally there would be these 100-foot clouds of dust coming in, and they would bury towns and farms and so and so forth. And they finally figured out what the problem was. The problem was, number one, that they had people on the East Coast who didn't own the land selling deeds to land out there in the Midwest and in the plains areas. Number one. Number two is that area, you know, the Great Plains, got an average rainfall of 2 inches a year. And the ecosystem there has adapted over thousands of years to be just fine. You know, the grasses and the plants and the animals and the flora and the fauna and everything had adapted to 2 inches of rain a year. Well, all these settlers go out there and think they're going to plant corn or whatever, plant crops and feed themselves and their family. They all failed because they didn't ask the native peoples. They said, we want to do some farming here. What do you think? Oh, don't do it. It's not going to work. You're a disaster. It's not going to work. You know, ask even a 9-year-old boy of some tribe out there, and they said, no good idea. But we went ahead and did that, and what happened is it disturbed the entire thousands of years old ecosystem. And all that was left was dust. When all the water was gone, they pulled up all the plants that had deep roots and all that, and they just gone. And so that's an example of hubris. Just charging in and doing whatever we want. Oh, a bunch of land. Let's plant crops. Doesn't work that way. So if we had, and I don't think I've mentioned this here, but I thought about I have mentioned this a time or two, but it's been a while. In Switzerland, they have every canton, like a state, has a board, a financial and business board. And if somebody wants to start a business in that canton, they have to apply to the board and show them what they want to do and who they're going to serve and what they're going to charge and such. And the board either approves it or they don't. The reason for that is that we don't need 10 department stores. You know, we don't need 30 car washes within a mile radius. We don't need all that stuff. And so they keep it really, really efficient. There's oversight. So what if we had done that with Facebook? You know, Mark Zuckerberg said, I got this great idea, and applied to the board and they said, okay, let's do a test run, maybe 10,000, 100,000 people in different states and see what happens. So then they start figuring out that kids start getting depressed and they start playing pranks, and then there's all the nefarious people getting a hold of this, and they would say, no, we're not going to do this. We can't do this. Because the things that have happened now, all the research is really critical of social media, and justly so, based on very large studies. So that's an example of an absence of humility. There's no wise mind in that process. So when we're practicing the meditation and or the self-compassion practices, the more we can simply set aside, like, why am I doing this? The best answer is, I don't know. Seems to work somehow. And there's thousands of years of meditation in every single religious tradition on the planet. some must be up with it, so I'll do this and see what happens. and in when we talk about what our experience is, and when I teach this and people are relatively new to meditation, I couldn't meditate at all, my mind wouldn't stop. And I said, well, it's important to know that that's not the objective, so don't worry, you didn't fail at anything. Sometimes the mind just runs amok, and that's okay. Just notice that the mind is running amok, and that's really the practice. So humility is the first step in wise mind, in beginner's mind. So to be aware of any motives that we may have, that we may or may not be aware of, and see if we can just set them aside and say, well, what's going to happen? I don't know, let's see. And we just do the exercise. Now, it's important to, this is sort of an addendum here, is that in practice, particularly meditation practice, it's important to have a good teacher, meaning somebody you can go to whenever you need to talk about your meditation experience and ask for guidance. And because that's the way the environment in which all of these practices have been for thousands of years. You have a meditation master, and meditation master says, go and meditate and see you at noon. And they come back and they say, well, what did you experience? And they describe their experience, and then the meditation master gives them instructions. They go meditate some more. And that happens over and over and over again as the person's abilities become more refined. Well, we don't really have that these days. There are a lot of really good teachers on various social media, but to have some that we can talk to personally and ask those questions is really important. That's what we're really missing. So we'll have to kind of make do. John Kabat-Zinn is a good reference, and Thich Nhat Hanh is a great reference, and Father Thomas Keating is a wonderful reference. To be able to avail ourselves of that guidance. And sometimes it's not direct guidance, but it's certainly guidance in the terms of, what would be the word? Orientation to the practices. Because when we're talking about beginner's mind, we're talking about orienting ourselves properly to the practices. So the humility of those people shines through tremendously, and so availing ourselves of those can be helpful. And just ask ourselves periodically, how's my wise mind? How's my beginner's mind here? Do I have any objectives that I'm trying to achieve here? And see if we can set them aside. Now, that being said, if we're really upset about something and we're really just kind of disoriented by something happened, some family crisis or whatever it is, sitting and meditating is fine. It's like first aid. We just really need to calm our nervous system down and get back into balance, to get back into the flow of life in a better frame of mind. And that's fine too. But that's sort of the acute. And when I'm talking about wise mind in general, that's the long-term part of the practice. So, okay, so I guess it's time to practice. And being aware as you can, and in the practice, the awareness of what's going on in one's mind, see if you can also be sensitive to motivation and what the motivation is, and what am I doing here, and why am I doing it, that sort of thing. And if that doesn't feel suitable, feel free to ignore it. But building awareness of what's actually happening in our mind, mentally and emotionally, is very helpful, and that's really part of the things that happen when we meditate. We become more aware of what's actually happening in our mind and our emotions. So see if we can do that, and then we'll do that meditation practice for a while, and then we're going to do a compassion exercise after that. So, places, everybody. Finding a comfortable spot, and you know the drill. And just kind of feeling how nice it feels to be settled, just settling. And we'll begin. And allowing ourselves to just settle into being right here, right now, if we can. Letting the entirety of our awareness settle into the body. Being aware of our points of contact with the chair or the floor, wherever we're sitting. And allowing everything to just settle. And we sort of invite our mind and our emotions into stillness. And allow ourselves to, as fully as we can, settle into the body. Because the body is just right here, right now. And when thoughts or emotions arise, simply recognizing and releasing them and returning to stillness. And turning our attention to our breath, simply observing how naturally the body just breathes in and breathes out all on its own. Allowing us consciousness and awareness moment by moment. And how amazing it is that we can just observe, breathing in and breathing out. And if you notice any tension in the jaws or the arms, what have you, just allow that to drain away. allowing ourselves to continue to settle into stillness and silence. And if the mind is still unruly, that's okay. And just let it be as it is. Knowing that our only motivation is to do the practice as best we can, whatever that is. And when any thought arises, simply recognizing it and letting it go. Over and over, minute by minute, moment by moment. And getting a sense of how much our mind and our emotions really like being restful. And getting the sense that in the present moment, there's nothing to fix. There's nothing that needs our attention. Our attention just is. and allowing ourselves to abide in this state as best we can, with a sense of rejuvenation. And as we continue to settle into this space, accepting it as it is. And in this space, with a sense of compassion, bringing to mind the billions of other people, the millions of other creatures, from the tiniest insects to birds and water creatures, and how we're all in this together. And at this very moment, we're all living and breathing and thriving. And perhaps getting the sense that we are part of this web of life, as integral to the system as any other being. That when we move, everything moves in response to some degree, and vice versa. And not only with all the creatures, other beings, but also with the earth itself, a living, breathing entity. That we are an integral part of this life around us, as important as every other part, every other being. And every being simply plays its role. It's like we're all playing in the same orchestra and singing in the same choir. And taking up our part, whatever that may be. And allowing compassion to flow in for ourselves and letting it flow through into all beings. Knowing that we are all connected somehow. And letting that flow through us, throughout, and into this whole web of life and all the beings in it. And sensing the harmony that ensues when we do this. And we are as much of an important part of this process as any and all of the other beings, including the trees and the rivers and the mountains. Each of us a strand, small or large, in this web of life. And allowing this vision and these feelings to settle into the body and absorb. And ground in the body like water being absorbed by a sponge. So that when the bell rings again, you can bring this with you as you go about your day. And come back to it at any time.